Hello world, Noah here, and welcome to the lab component for lesson 3, which is math. In this lab, we're going to solve a fairly simple word problem using code. I'm going to explain the problem, and we'll try to sort of think through it before we start to write any code. But throughout this whole assignment, I recommend that you focus more on the concepts and the logic, really, as opposed to actually writing the code. The code's going to be pretty easy, but if you can sort of think through this problem logically and figure out the steps that you need to do and the calculations that you need to make, that's really the important part, and that's really what I want. What I want you to take away from this assignment here. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and read through the problem first, and then we can start thinking about how to possibly attack it. So you'll notice first that we have two variables defined. We have one called cookies, and we have one called friends. They're both integers, right, because they're both equal to these values, which are whole numbers, and whole numbers are integers. So cookies is equal to 10, and friends is equal to 3. Now this is just one example, and if we write our code well, we should be able to change these numbers however we want and, get the correct answer. But for now, let's just stick with 10 cookies and 3 friends so that we can sort of think through the ideas, and then we can, change them later and try stuff out. So we have this many cookies, and we have this many friends. We want to distribute the cookies to our friends in a simple and fair manner. Now, to define simple and fair, I have provided 3 criteria. You cannot split a cookie, so, you can't, break a cookie in half and give one half to each person. You must give whole cookies to everyone. You cannot save or throw away any cookies. So, let's say that there's 2 people and you have 5 cookies. You can't just give each person 2 cookies and throw away that last cookie, or eat it or save it or anything. You have to give the cookie to someone. And the last one, which is important but maybe a little bit confusing, nobody can have more than one more cookie than anyone else. And if that wording is a little bit confusing, let's actually work through an example to try and understand how all of these criteria change our answers and how many different answers there are and stuff like that. So of course the question is, how many cookies does each friend get? And so let's work through an example. We have 3 friends and 10 cookies. So let's just write this out. We have cookies, caps lock. We have 10 cookies, and we have 3 friends. I'm gonna give my friends some names. We'll call them Ethan, Josh, and Max, because why not? So we have 3 friends, Ethan, Josh, and Max, and we have 10 cookies. So how do we go about giving out these cookies? Well, let's say, we can't just give all 10 cookies to one person, because that's obviously not fair. You could try a bunch of different things, but the easiest way is probably maybe even the first way that you would think of, which would be, hand out the cookies one at a time. Right, so we have 10 cookies. Let's give each person 1 cookie. Okay, how many cookies do we have left? We have 7 cookies left. Now let's give, everyone another cookie. Okay, now we have 4 cookies left. Let's give everyone another cookie. Now we have 1 cookie left. We don't have enough to give every person another cookie, but we can't split this cookie. That's a rule. We can't give each person a third of a cookie. We also can't save or throw away any cookies, so we can't just ignore this 1 cookie. We have to give it to someone. And so let's just say that I give it to Ethan. It doesn't really matter. But let's say that I give it to Ethan. So now we've given out 10 cookies. And what we need to check, first of all, did we split any cookies? No, because there's no, fractions, there's no decimal places. Did we save or throw away any cookies? No, because we got down to 0, and you can do 4 plus 3 plus 3 is 10. So all 10 cookies were given out to someone. But what about this last rule? Nobody can have more than 1 more cookie than anyone else. Well, we can look and see Ethan has 4 cookies, and Josh or Max, they both have 3. So Ethan has 1 more cookie than Josh. We said that nobody can have more than 1 more cookie. Ethan has exactly 1 more cookie, which is not more than 1 more. And so therefore, this arrangement is fair. It's simple and fair. It passes all three of these tests. An example of a distribution that is not fair would be something like this, right? 5, 2, and 3. If you add them up, you still get 10 cookies. We didn't save or throw any cookies. There's no decimal places, all that good stuff. But if you look, you can see Ethan has 5 cookies and Josh only has 2. So Ethan has 3 more cookies than Josh does. And we said he can only have at most 1 more cookie. And so that's not fair. And, this example should be pretty clear, but you get the idea. So basically, when you're looking at the number of extra cookies that someone has, it can't be more than 1 more. And that's actually a really important point, because if we take all of these rules, and let's just make one more thing. Let's say that the names don't actually matter, right? Because we could give the extra cookie to Ethan, or we could give it to Josh, or we could give it to Max. But let's say that if this is our answer, we'll just say one person gets 4 cookies and 2 people get 3 cookies. And, we don't care which person gets the extra cookie. We just care how many people get however many cookies they get, right? And so if we make that concession, if we say, okay, one person gets 4 and 2 people get 3, and we have all of these rules, there will actually only be one answer for any problem. And you can try and think about why that's true. You can work through some examples and try to figure out, is there another solution to this problem? And, you won't be able to find one, and maybe that's enough to convince you. But there will only be one solution if we take, all of those sort of constraints into account, right? And so that's basically how this goes. And so now we need to figure out an algorithm. How do we figure out that this is the answer? So just to write it out, the answer will be 1 friend gets 4 cookies and 2 friends get 3 cookies. So that's our answer. And so how do we figure this out? Well, what did we do exactly? We basically divided. We kept giving out cookies one at a time until we didn't have enough cookies left to give out. So first, basically what we did is there's 3 friends, right? So we subtracted 3, and then we said, okay, now we have to stop. We can't subtract 3 anymore, right? So we're basically repeatedly subtracting the number of friends, and every time we do that, each person gets 1 cookie. We had 10, we subtracted 3, which means that each of our 3 people got 1 cookie, right? Then we subtracted another 3, each person got another cookie. We subtracted another 3, each person got 1 cookie, and now we've gotten to the point where we can't subtract 3 anymore because we only have 1 cookie left. So we're essentially doing repeated subtraction, right? And repeated subtraction is just division. Or I guess repeated subtraction, with the same number. We're subtracting 3 every single time, and so, it's the same thing as division. So what we're really doing is we're dividing the number of cookies by the number of friends, right? We're essentially doing something like 10 divided by 3. But it's not quite 10 divided by 3, because 10 divided by 3 would have a decimal place in it. And one of the rules that we said is that you can't split a cookie, which means that there's no decimal places involved. A number without a decimal place is an integer, and so it sounds like we're trying to do division, but we want the answer that we get to be an integer. And that should sound a lot like integer division, which is a concept that we just learned about. So the first thing that we're doing is we're doing some sort of an integer division. So let's go ahead and write our solution down here. And we can actually start writing a little bit of code, but again, focus on the concepts. What are we doing here? We are calculating the number of cookies that every person will get, right? I guess the minimum number of cookies that each person will get. So in this case, every person will get at least 3 cookies. One person will get 4, but every person will get at least 3 cookies, right? And so we'll call this variable, and I'm going to name these variables, pretty long names, and you can name them shorter if you want. But again, I just want to make sure that this is super clear. So we're going to say min cookies per friend is equal to cookies integer divide by friends, right? So we're taking all the cookies, and you can even think about it like this. We have a bunch of cookies. We're dividing it amongst all of our friends, but we're doing it in a way such that there won't be any remainder. Right, so I think that this part should be pretty clear, right? We're just dividing up the cookies, but we don't want any sort of fraction. And in this example, for these particular numbers, we're doing 10, not 20, we're doing 10 integer divided by 3, which is equal to 3. So 10 integer divided by 3 is 3, right? Because if it were 9 divided by 3, it would be 3, and then you add 1, and so we're doing integer division, so we get 3, right? So the answer is 3, and we're saying that the minimum cookies per friend is 3, which is what we agreed with in our example. And I think that that idea should make sense, but again, you can sort of think through it. You could try, different numbers. You could try 2 friends and 5 cookies, 2 friends and 4 cookies, and maybe it'll become more clear. But integer division. But this doesn't account for everything, right? Because this would say that each person gets 3 cookies. But if we just stopped there, then we would have this 1 extra cookie that we didn't give to anyone. And of course, we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to throw away any cookies, right? So what we need to do is we need to figure out how many extra cookies we have, because all of those extra cookies need to go somewhere. They need to go to different people, right? And so let's just call this extra cookies. And the number of extra cookies, well, there's sort of 2 ways that you could do this. There's one that's a little bit, maybe it's a way that you'd think of first, but there's another way that sort of demonstrates the point better. And so the one thing that you could do is you could say, okay, 3 friends times 3 cookies is 9, and you do 10 minus 9, and you get 1, and there's 1 extra cookie. So you could do that, and if you think of that, that's perfectly valid. But just to go off of the lesson that we're on, there is another way that we could do it. What we're asking here essentially is, if we divided up all of these cookies evenly amongst the people, what's the remainder? How many cookies are left, right? And so the number of extra cookies is just the remainder of this division. It's the remainder of cookies divided by friends. And so the way we write that is, of course, cookies mod friends. And again, if we look at this, we're doing 10 mod 3, which is equal to 1, right? So 10 mod 3 is equal to 1, because you can think a good way to do it in your head is, okay, 9 mod 3 is obviously 0, because 9 is a multiple of 3, right? And so 10 is 1 more than 9, and so 10 mod 3 is 1. So if you don't believe me, you can put that into a calculator, but that's, pretty straightforward. So 10 mod 3 is 1. This is the number of extra cookies. And again, that's exactly what we said. We said after we divide them all up evenly, 10 people, so you get, everyone will get 3, and there will be 1 cookie left over, right? So I think that makes sense. I think that should be pretty clear. But we've figured out the minimum number of cookies for each friend. We figured out the number of extra cookies. So now we need to figure out, how do we split up these extra cookies? And this is a part where we sort of have to think a little bit before we can write any more code. But essentially, the idea is that you can ask the question. I think the good question is, we know the number of extra cookies, but we could ask the question, how many people will get an extra cookie, right? Because in this case, Ethan will get an extra cookie, but Max and Josh won't. And again, the names don't matter, so we could say 1 person gets an extra cookie and 2 people don't. So how many people get an extra cookie? Well, given this information that we have so far, we should be able to figure it out. And I think another question that might also help just to remember is, how many extra cookies does each person get? And this answer should be maybe a little bit more obvious than the previous question. So how many extra cookies does each person get? Well, the answer has to be 1, right? Each person, again, based on this rule, can not have more than 1 more cookie than anyone else. So if you gave 1 person 2 extra cookies, that would not be fair, because they would have 2 more cookies than another person, which is not allowed. So every person that gets an extra cookie gets 1 extra cookie. So that's very important. Now, how many people get an extra cookie? Well, okay, if there are this many extra cookies, and each of those cookies goes to a different person, then the number of extra cookies is the same as the number of people who get an extra cookie. I would, sort of encourage you to think about that for a second, if that's not immediately clear. But that's, sort of an important thing that you have to realize in order to solve this problem, right? If I had 5 extra cookies left, how many people get an extra cookie, right? Well, I can't give 2 of those cookies to some person because then there will be someone who has the minimum number, which is 2 less than those 2 extra, which is not allowed. And I think that should be fairly clear once you think about it. I don't want to say too much to make it confusing, but the idea is that the number of extra cookies is the same as the number of people who get an extra cookie. So let's just say something like num friends get extra cookie. And again, these variable names are really, really long, but I just want to make sure that it's super clear, what exactly is going on here. So the number of friends that get an extra cookie is equal to the number of extra cookies. And, I guess you could just name this variable num friends get extra cookie to begin with, but I just, again, want to make this super clear. So the number of extra cookies is equal to the number of friends that get an extra cookie. How many people don't get an extra cookie? Well, that one's really simple. It's just the total number of friends minus the number of friends that do get an extra cookie. Right, so we'll just say num friends don't get extra cookie is equal to friends minus num friends get extra cookie. Okay, I guess this is, a bit long. I'll give you that. But I think it sort of helps demonstrate the point. So the number of friends that don't get an extra cookie is just the total number minus the ones that do, and that that should be obvious. So the last question is, how many cookies do each of these people get? Well, if the person doesn't get an extra cookie, they get the minimum number of cookies, which we already calculated. If they do get an extra cookie, we already said that they only get 1 extra cookie, so they get the minimum plus 1. And so now we have all of the information that we need in order to solve the problem. We know how many people get extra cookies, and we know how many cookies they get. We know how many people don't get extra cookies, and we know how many cookies they get as well. And so all we need to do now is, display the answer. And to do this, we'll go ahead and use a print statement. So we're going to use a print statement. This should look familiar from the first lesson and maybe some other lessons, but once again, the print statement allows you to display some information. And so we have, this code that does some math, but we want to actually display the answer at the end so that it'll be useful to us. And so we use the print command, the print statement, to do that. And so let's print it out in a nice sentence structure, sort of like this. So our output's going to look something like this. We're going to say x friend or friends. We don't know if it's plural, and we're not going to worry about plural. We're just going to do that. So that many friends get, get X number of cookies. And again, I guess, plural stuff. And some number of friends get some number of cookies. And I guess this goes like that. So just really quick, because this is kind of new, this syntax with the commas here, I'm gonna just go ahead and make this nice and long so we can see it. This syntax with the commas is new, but basically it lets us stick variables in the middle of our text. So X is just a placeholder. We're gonna fill those in, but when we put those variables in, it'll say, some friends get some cookies and some friends get some cookies. It's just going to stick the variables in. And, once we actually run the code, I think that'll be perfectly clear. So let's start with the number of people that do get an extra cookie, because that's what we did here. So we said in this case, one person, or I guess one friend, gets, 4 cookies. How do we do this? Well, how many people get an extra cookie? It's num friends get extra cookie. And how many cookies do they get? Well, they get the minimum cookies per friend, underscore, plus 1, right? We said they get the minimum number plus 1 extra cookie, because these are the people that get an extra cookie. And now, how about the people that don't get an extra cookie? Well, that's num friends don't get extra cookie. And how many cookies do they get? Well, they just get the minimum number of cookies, which is min cookies per friend. This is a really long line, mostly because the variable names are so long. But don't let that confuse you or anything. It's super simple. We're basically just printing out the answer in a nice format. But this is the interesting part, where we actually did the calculations and we used integer division and modulus to do it. So let's go ahead and test this first. If I run this with F5, you can see it says 1 friend gets 4 cookies and 2 friends get 3 cookies. So 1, 4, 2, 3, which is exactly what we expect. And we can, of course, change the numbers. Let's say that we had 4 friends. Well, what should the answer be? Each person should get 2 cookies, and then 2 people should get 1 extra cookie. So let's see. 2 friends get 3 cookies. So that's 6. I'm sorry, I think I said it wrong. 2 friends get 3 cookies, and 2 friends get 2 cookies. No, that's what I said. I said 2 people get 2 cookies, and 2 people get 1 extra cookie. So this is the right answer, and you can say, okay, this is 4 plus 6 is 10, and we're not breaking any of the rules here, so this works. And you can play around with this. You can change the values. Like, for example, if I put 11 here, it should say 3 people get an extra cookie. So it should be the same answer, but now 3 people get the extra cookie and only 1 person gets the minimum number. So you get the idea. You can play around with these numbers, but the point is that this code, the calculations that we did, will work. And if you understand how we arrived at those calculations, and if you understand why all of that makes sense, then that's the key takeaway from this lab, and you should be good to go. If it's still a little bit confusing, I would recommend trying to work it out on paper. Don't worry so much about the code for this one. You can try some other examples, different numbers of cookies and friends, and I think eventually the answer will become pretty clear to you. So that's all for this lab. Hopefully that all makes sense. Good application of integer division and modulus. These are concepts that will show up again in the future, whether you expect them or not, but they're good things to know. So that's all for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one.